Good morning. Good morning. Take a couple minutes to get started. This is my normal weekly live. I get into some nuances about menopause and some of the symptoms that happen as a result of that. So we'll give a couple minutes for folks to stream in. If folks are in Portland, I hope you're warm and in a place that you can settle in with the snow that we're having, which is very atypical for Portland. So hopefully you're someplace warm and can stay for a little while. We'll just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. I think the individual that just joined, I don't think we've met. Thank you for showing up. Where are you joining from? Are you here in Portland or elsewhere? Well, it's nice to meet you. I'm Dr. Dunbar. I'm a private practice physician in Portland. Actually have what's called a direct primary care practice. Are you familiar with direct primary care? It's a bit of a different model. So instead of playing the insurance game and being worried about insurance dictating how I take care of my patients, it's a direct relationship between my patient and myself. We define what labs are needed and what our treatment plan is. Good morning. How are you? So patients have longer visits with me. They can usually get in and see me same day, next day. I can email, text my patients. I can see them in person or virtual. I focus a lot on prevention and disease reversal, really treating root cause, because I get to spend more time, right? My visits are usually an hour. So yeah, it's a direct relationship. And in order to provide that kind of access and that sort of degree of care that's personalized, it's a flat monthly fee that patients pay. And you can jump on my website. It's cereveatwellness.com and look at all the information there. It's a flat fee that's paid monthly. And anything that I deliver within the confines of my clinical practice is covered for that monthly fee, whether it's 1 visit or 30 visits or 50 visits. So that's how direct primary care works. So hopefully that's helpful. We've got a couple more people joining, so thank you for showing up. I apologize, I was not available last week for the live, so we'll resume things this week. So we'll just hang in there and we'll give people a couple more minutes to jump in. Is that who I think it is? I don't think I've seen you on Instagram before. It's nice to see you here. This is amazing. Oh my gosh. That's awesome. Hopefully you're hunkered down somewhere. I think you're still here, right? In Oregon so far. So hopefully you're hunkered down. It's crazy that I kind of poo-pooed the way I'm like, it's not going to snow, whatever. And look at, here we go. It's crazy. All right, well, maybe just a minute or two. We'll get started. So I do this weekly live. It's talk about menopause, perimenopause, and classic symptoms, not so classic symptoms. My goal was just to sort of create a conversation around something that we just don't talk about very often and in a detailed way. Okay. I know it is pretty, right? It's so nice. It is actually very, and in Portland it sticks around because they don't do anything with it. When we were in Minnesota, there would have been trucks going by all night long, making sure the roads are clear, but here it just sort of settles and it's actually really nice. My kids have already been outside because school was closed, so they've already been outside playing in the snow, which is where I'll head after this. But okay, we'll get started. It's 5 minutes after. So again, every Thursday at 10, I've been doing a live on menopause or perimenopause. We've covered topics around sleep, night sweats. We've talked about GI issues. We've talked about metabolic health in menopause. We also talked about, had a super cool conversation on like sensory perception or sensory processing, which changes dramatically during perimenopause and even up to and after menopause. So I know for me, I've noticed my like I can't tolerate as much. Like I have a very low tolerance for a lot of stimulation. And that all ties into our hormone fluctuations, you know, as we're going through perimenopause and into menopause. So it's been sort of really nice to create some community around the conversation and make it a little bit more easy to talk about. I did one live where I just sort of said, how do you even start this conversation with your doc, right? What sort of questions should you ask? Who should you be looking for? Just to give people a little bit of guidance. So today I was going to talk about menopause and like allergies, or maybe noticing that there's a little bit of sensitivity to foods that you didn't have a sensitivity to before, or maybe feeling like, gosh, you know, there's an increased susceptibility to autoimmune disorders during menopause or perimenopause, and again, as we approach menopause and then beyond. And why does that happen? Good morning, Mika, how are you? Why does that happen? And what do we do about that? You know, is there really something physiologic going on? And how do we address that? I've got this weird spot on my glasses, so give me 2 seconds. I'm going to close this window, see if it takes care of it. Hang on 1 sec. Nah, I feel like it's a little dark, but at least I don't have that white spot on my eye, so I apologize for that. So maybe I'll throw this out there for those that are on. Have you noticed, if you're in your 40s and above, have you noticed that certain foods you could eat before, now you have an intolerance to them, or you feel like you're more susceptible to allergies, you get more stuffy, sort of have more allergic type symptoms? Has anyone noticed that at all? Okay, yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, so we'll go through why that may be happening. And our bodies are so multifactorial that it may not be just one thing, right? So there could be a couple things going on, but the goal is, and the goal is really working with somebody who can tease some of this stuff out and say, okay, how much of this is related to histamine, which is what we're going to be talking today. Is this a true thing, an autoimmune thing that we need to be chasing? So I'll give some context today, and then, you know, hopefully some information that people can take back and noodle on and maybe keep a food diary and see if some of this stuff lands and some of this stuff resonates. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is really histamine, and then how that changes, or what are some of the potential things that histamine can be causing in our body, and how does menopause or estrogen and progesterone and testosterone play into histamine? So hello, for those that are drawing. I'll throw that question. Oh my gosh, I have to not use my hands when I talk because it keeps doing these little motion things. For the person that just joined, have you noticed any sensitivities to foods? If you're kind of 40 and above, have you noticed any sensitivity to foods that you didn't have prior? You know, things that you could tolerate. You're like, oh, I don't know, makes my stomach ill, or maybe gives me like stuffiness, or noticing new allergies later in life. Just curious. We've got already 2 yeses, so I'm curious to see if that's been your walk. So we're talking about increased sensitivity to foods, maybe an intolerance to certain foods that we could tolerate before, being more susceptible to allergies or autoimmune things, and why that happens as we get into our perimenopause and then beyond into menopause. And it's the role of histamine. So maybe I'll back up a little bit and just talk a little bit about what is histamine, how do we get histamine into our body, and then how do we clear it, and how does estrogen play into histamine? So histamine plays a role in immunity, it plays a role in gut health, and then it also plays a role it's a neurotransmitter for our brain, right? So it sort of controls some cognitive, some thinking, some fatigue, or how alert we are. So it has some pretty significant role within our body. It also affects our vascular system. So histamine is wildly important for multitude of systems in our body. And what can happen is we can get histamine is created in things called mast cells. We can also eat foods that are high in histamine. And then again, the beauty of our body is it's always trying to get to this sweet spot, right? This nice homeostatic spot. So if we're bringing in something, there's got to be a way to get rid of it. Like if you've got a funnel, right? If stuff is coming on the top, it's got to drain out the bottom. So then there are enzymes that we have to break down histamine, so we don't have histamine backing up into the system. So there are two enzymes, but the one that really plays more of a role as it comes to estrogen and progesterone and testosterone is DAO. So that particular enzyme breaks down histamine. So we're either eating foods high in histamine, so that's the input, or mast cells are releasing more histamine, so that's how we add things to the system. And then this enzyme DAO is trying to break down histamine and clear it from the system. So histamine, again, in the skin, what it does in the skin, it can make us a little itchy, it can give us a rash, kind of like eczema, right? All of a sudden, in our 40s, we're noticing, our skin is more dry, we've got these rough spots, we're developing eczema all of a sudden when we've never had that as a kiddo. From our vascular system, it can cause sort of some dizziness, some palpitations. We talked about palpitations, I think it was 2 sessions ago. So histamine plays a role in palpitations as well. In our gut, it can cause some acid reflux, some indigestion, bloating, gas, right? Histamine plays a huge role as it relates to gut health. And then again, from like brain function or neurologic, histamine controls, good morning. Thanks for joining. Histamine controls like level of alertness. Do we feel sleepy? Do we feel fatigued? Are we more irritable? Are we more anxious? And some of this stuff, again, if you think back to some of the previous sessions we've done, we've seen these symptoms before, and we've talked about how estrogen gets involved in that in other ways. And now we've got another pathway that could be also exacerbating or sort of adding to the mix, right? So like palpitations we talked about, like some of the sensory input stuff we talked about, mood changes we've talked about. So histamine also plays a role because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it's a neurotransmitter directly into the brain. So that, again, affects our irritability, our mood, our fatigue, those sorts of things. If you think about, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but if you think about antihistamines, Benadryl is sedating, right? It's an antihistamine, tries to block histamine, but it's sedating. So if you have lots of histamine around, it makes you a little like a little hopped up, right? So just a little, I'm kind of jumping ahead. So again, most of the histamine is made in mast cells. And the way our body will work, if there's a cell that has something, usually it requires something attaching to it to sort of give it a signal, and then it does the task. So estrogen can attach to mast cells and release histamine. So that's how estrogen gets involved with increasing our histamine. And then estrogen also downregulates the enzyme to get rid of histamine. So when we have a lot of estrogen around, think like puberty, if we have a lot of estrogen around, then it's releasing more mast cells or releasing more histamine. So you may notice during your cycle when you're much younger, you may be more, again, like more stuffy, more itchy, more bloated, more gassy, right? Again, all those systems get affected because there's more histamine running around. So that's why when we're younger and we've got more estrogen around, we have more histamine floating around, because estrogen is releasing more mast cells. Now, when we have a decline in estrogen, we don't have the mast cell, but then now we don't have the enzyme clearing it, right? So the enzyme is not clearing it as much. And if we are eating foods that are high in histamine, so we've got more input and we've got less output now we're still having this backup of histamine. So we can see some of the similar symptoms in puberty, but now it's because estrogen is reducing the amount of clearing that we're doing of histamine. Does that make sense? I'm going to pause for 2 seconds and make sure that that process makes sense. Just a thumbs up, yes. I'll assume so. Okay, good. All right, thank you. All right, perfect. All right. So when we have more histamine around, then we have all of these other systemic sort of not complications, but manifestations. So let's see. Yeah, strawberries, citrus. I don't know if strawberries, citrus fruit for sure, have a lot of histamine. No, you are so not broken. Oh my gosh. No, so not broken. I know, right? And even again, this is when I first started doing these Instagram lives, and really that's been my walk in medicine. It's just, as I go through or have family members, it's like, okay, I need to dig into this a little bit more. So part of this was just me navigating some of this myself, being 52, and I'm like, what the H is happening? So reading the books, digging into the research. So no, you're not broken. We, medical community, just do not do a good job, and I'm just as guilty. So I'm doing my best to undo some of that as well, right? To just sort of get this information out of there. So you're saying now if we're eating them and we're bloating, this could potentially. So again, this is like multifactorial, right? So histamine for sure can cause bloating, can sure cause like acid reflux, indigestion, gas, those sorts of things. So I think the first thing is just keeping a food diary. And you're like, okay, I know that every time I eat this thing, I have these symptoms. Then yeah, I would say there's probably a good correlation with that if it's a high histamine food. Poor gut health will also decrease how active that enzyme is to clear histamine. So the first thing, really, the foundational thing, is making sure we have a really good, healthy gut. And gut health really comes down to, like, what foods are we eating outside of histamine, right? Like, what foods are really going to create that nice, thick mucus lining and create a really healthy gut so we don't have leaky gut or gut dysbiosis, it's called. You want to have good, like microbiome diversity, multiple and high quantities of the normal bacteria that lives in our gut. So when you have a good, healthy gut, that nice thick lining based on the food you eat, our exercise, our stress, right? Cortisol also affects histamine release. It actually increases histamine. It's our stress hormone. And maybe I'll give a little thing about physiology, right? If you think about it, cortisol, our stress hormone, is Mika's like 52. Yes, I'm 52. So cortisol is our stress hormone, right? Fight or flight. You're being chased by your bear. Holy moly, you want all systems like fired up. So histamine makes you alert, makes you anxious, gets your heart rate up, gets your blood pressure up. It just like you're ready to fight, you're ready to run. So cortisol just jacks up histamine. Thank you. I appreciate you, Mika. Histamine just really revs up histamine. So cortisol, this chronic stress that we're all under, that I don't know half the time if we even recognize it anymore. We just sort of put our heads down and just keep plowing, especially women do that, in my opinion. We have this chronic low-level stress that just keeps pumping out cortisol. So we always have this too much histamine running around in our system or running around in our gut. It decreases the activity of that enzyme to clear histamine. And then also we've got just a lot of histamine running around. So, sorry, I got a little sidetracked. So first thing, foundational, healthy gut. We'll see you. Take care. First foundation, healthy gut. So if you say, okay, boom, my gut is healthy, and that's eating the right food, exercising to a certain extent, stress reduction, getting good sleep. Sleep also plays into cortisol. So once we have those foundational things, doing a probiotic, the right probiotic. I'm a huge fan of Pendulum. Akkermansia creates more butyrate. Butyrate is a huge bacteria that's really been well studied to improve that mucus layer, that gut lining. So I'm a huge fan of that. And then I usually recommend people take this polyphenol booster also from Pendulum. So those are the two that I recommend personally, I take as well. So good gut health. once that's dialed in, you've got the lifestyle things that are supporting all of that. Reduction in alcohol, I'll get to that too, how that plays into histamine. But alcohol will decrease your gut health. So once that's dialed in, then again, food diary. Okay, I'm eating these foods, and yes, I'm having more, bloating, gas, indigestion. Then yeah, I would say peel back. It could just be those are more high histamine foods, and then maybe taking those out would be helpful. Again, because as our estrogen goes down, we just don't have as much of that enzyme activity to clear the histamine. That was a super long-winded answer, so I apologize. But hopefully that answered that. Okay, so garlic, onion, Jennifer had to jump off, but jalapenos have all behaved differently, but not sure if that's why. Yeah. Those are, I have to look those up specifically. I know like fermented foods, and I'll go through a list, and maybe I'll post something online too, like what are our high histamine foods, so that we can sort of keep track of that stuff. Hey, how are you? It's so good to see you. Thank you for joining. We're talking about estrogen and histamine. Really the topic is, have you noticed an intolerance to certain foods as our level of wisdom increases? Foods you could tolerate before, you can't tolerate anymore. And could that be because those are higher in histamine, or we just have an intolerance now because as our estrogen level declines, we don't have as much of the enzyme around to clear histamine. So if we're continuing to eat foods that maybe are a little higher in histamine, and we don't have the enzyme around to kind of clear the bucket, then we may be noticing some intolerance to having more histamine running around, which can present with gut issues, right? Bloating, gas, sort of affects our cognition. It affects our vascular system. What else? Affects our skin, right? We may get a little bit itchy, developing some eczema, those sorts of things. So we're talking about the interplay between estrogen and histamine, and then the enzyme that's supposed to clear the histamine from our system. So foods that are, let me back up. Other than foods, and I'll post something on the foods because it's kind of a long list, and I don't want to just read off a list, and I don't have these boom, boom, boom top of mind. I have some general categories. So maybe I'll just do some generalities, and then I'll try to put something a little bit more detailed. So in general, the things that are going to be higher in histamine, wine, beer, and champagne are going to be higher in histamine as far as like drinks. Then you've got fermented foods, so like sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurts are also higher in histamine. Your citrus fruits are higher in histamine. Avocados are high in histamine. And I'll just say, I wouldn't necessarily be an advocate for, okay, let's just take all these things out, because especially avocados, they're so good. They're so wildly healthy. They're like the perfect little thing, right? They just provide so much good healthy fat. Mika, you're hilarious. Oh, I'm so sorry. Is that because that's in your nutrition and you think you need to take it out, or tell me why you're upset? So I wouldn't be an advocate or just saying, okay, let's just take all this stuff out, especially when we're talking about avocado, because it's just such a healthy little compact deliciousness. So with caution, I guess I would say, right? So avocados, eggplant is another one that's high in histamine. Those are the things I can think off the top of my head. But again, I'll put a more detailed list out there. But again, be mindful. Don't just start taking things out, especially if they have other nutritional value and other nutritional benefit. And then again, you are your own N of one. So in medicine, we talk about, research studies and this, and how many people were involved in the study. So you are your own research study. So even if a food is not necessarily high in histamine, but your body is already giving you feedback that it can't tolerate this said thing, then I would listen to your body. So keeping a food diary, drinking and only drink bubbles if I do, and I love sauerkraut. Oh, gotcha. That's the thing, right? So fermented foods generally are a good thing. So again, I wouldn't say just completely eliminate. I would just take note, right? Just take note. If you're finding that doing fermented food is actually more helpful for you, then you may not need to adjust anything. Because generally speaking, fermented foods are good. It gives us prebiotics. That's a good thing. Again, when we talk about gut health. So in context, I guess, right? So you don't have to completely eliminate all your things. I think it's just about, again, your own N of one. Taking note, how's it working for you, and then making adjustments as you need to. So we talked about food and drink. So aged cheeses, I'm going to look down a little bit. So cured meats too. We've got cured meats like bacon and salami. Hello, how are you? Bacon and salami and pepperoni, right? So those cured meats. And then just as an aside, processed meats. This is a little off topic, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. So processed meats have a direct correlation to colon cancer. And it's what we call a linear relationship. So the more you eat, the higher your risk of colon cancer. So I try my best to sort of educate all my patients that it's just not worth it, right? If just walk away from processed meat. It's just, the risk is not worth it. We are seeing people get colon cancer in their 40s, in their 30s even, and it's just a travesty without genetic predilection, without running in their family. So that, and it's because of the amount of processed meat and processed things we eat. So processed meat just isn't worth it, in my opinion, in my professional and personal opinion. So aside from it being high in histamine, it also has, again, a direct linear relationship to increasing your risk of colon cancer. So other reasons, we talked about stress, and then I'm going to throw this out there. There have been, I don't know if there's really been studies or we've just sort of noticed this, that those that have had a COVID infection are seeing sort of increased mast cell activation. So again, mast cells hold histamine, something attaches to the mast cell, boom, opens up, releases a bunch of histamine. So we're seeing this in some people where if they've had a previous COVID-19 infection or they've gotten COVID in the past, that they've developed what's called a mast cell activation syndrome, where they seem to be releasing more histamine. So then again, it's about taking note. Okay, what are my other high histamine foods? Again, repair the gut first. You keep your food diary. You are your own study, paying attention, not adding things to the bucket that may be complicating or increasing mast cell activation. So those are some other reasons for increased histamine. And then when it comes to the enzyme, other than estrogen, some of us just genetically don't have as active of that enzyme activity. So we may not be clearing histamine as well. And then there's certain medications that will also down-regulate that enzyme. Those medications are antidepressants. Antidepressants. So amitriptyline, I'm going to read these names because I don't want to forget them. Amitriptyline, Cymbalta, Effexor, Prozac, and Zoloft. Those antidepressants have been shown to decrease the activity of the enzyme. So again, clearing that histamine out of the system. We talked about antihistamines, right? So anti, to suppress histamine. So Benadryl and Zyrtec. Benadryl is more sedating. Zyrtec is less sedating. There are some rhythm medications that control the heart rhythm. So if you're on blood pressure medications, talking to your doc, make sure you're not on one. And if you have to be, right, it's like, okay, risk versus benefit. If you need it because you've got heart issues, you're going to stay on that. So then we have to modify someplace else to make sure that we're not, again, adding too much histamine to the bucket. Anti-inflammatories can also down-regulate that enzyme. So if we're on chronic anti-inflammatories, I'm not talking, I tweaked my knee or my back and I took ibuprofen or Advil. I'm saying you're on this thing every day, multiple times a day. There's some other significant consequences of chronic anti-inflammatory use as well. So that's another medication I'm not a huge fan of keeping people on chronically. Every now and again, sure, but not a chronic medication because it's got some long-term complications. And then potentially proton pump inhibitors. So the stuff that controls acid reflux. So again, right, some of the medications we're using to supposedly help can maybe exacerbating some of the things. So we just have to be mindful and make sure your doc is watching the store and sort of keeping track of everything for you. So how do we get through this? It's a fact of life. We are all going to go through menopause, but we do not have to suffer through it. Having the information, treating yourself as your own study, taking note, being observant, monitoring your symptoms, keeping a food diary, right? I would say for sure can be helpful just to say, okay, is this a pattern? And then optimizing our nutrition for gut health. And again, just high level processed foods are going to wreak havoc on your gut. Ultra refined sugars, they're going to wreak havoc on your gut. So first thing is just if we can remove that stuff, that would be the first thing. Fiber is additive. So adding more fiber into our nutrition is going to be the best thing for our gut health. Some of the beans and legumes can be high in histamine, so you're going to have to bob and weave through that and make sure that's, again, not worsening your symptoms. So just being curious and trying things and being willing to come back and retry, cook it a different way can be helpful at times. But fiber generally is going to be beneficial for gut health. Fried, fatty, greasy, not going to be beneficial. Alcohol typically will worsen gut health. Again, there's a difference between a drink a week versus 10 a week, right? So the degree of consumption is also going to be different. So repair the gut, potentially the probiotic, the pendulum products, right? So diet and gut health is the first thing. Then we say managing stress, right? Again, that cortisol level, see if we can bring that down. So are we doing yoga? Are we meditating? Good social connection? Do we have humans in our life that we feel connected to, that we can talk to, we can navigate some of this stuff with? So addressing that social connection so that cortisol level comes down. Are we getting adequate sleep? Because that not getting good sleep, is going to increase or keep our cortisol level high. So are we getting good sleep to make sure that we're keeping that cortisol level down? Then, of course, there's supplements. So vitamin C can be helpful. Quercetin, which is actually naturally found in apples, can be helpful to upregulate that enzyme. So that may be helpful. So from a supplement standpoint, looking at those things. And then there's medications, right? Do we want to add an antihistamine? Again, as far as the kind of doc I am, I tend to work lifestyle first before I start to add medications, because generally speaking, there's side effects with every medication that we do. So if we're adding a med, then we're dealing with the risk of the side effect of that medication. But that's an option. If we really needed it, we can add an antihistamine, a daily Zyrtec. Or I'm not a huge fan of Benadryl, so Zyrtec, one of that's what's called a second generation antihistamine, because it's not as sedating. And then obviously, since we're talking about menopause, hormone replacement. If someone is on hormone replacement, if they're taking estrogen, obviously if we're increasing your estrogen, are we going to see an increase in mast cell activation? So we need to be monitoring symptoms more frequently. But usually if we still have our uterus, we're not going to take unopposed estrogen. We're going to be taking progesterone. Progesterone as well is going to help increase the activity of that enzyme. So again, we hope that the increase in estrogen, but then also the increase in progesterone is going to balance each other out. But making sure that you're keeping track of your symptoms, you're staying plugged in with your doc and monitoring to say, again, are we creating one thing by helping the other? Absolutely. Medications to increase our estrogen level can be helpful for symptoms, but estrogen is just wildly important for our overall health, right? Long-term brain, bone, and heart health. So what about yam cream? So tell me about that, Mika, because I think you use it. I haven't studied that, so I got a question about what about yam cream. I haven't done any research on that, so tell me what you're finding has been helpful. So give me a little bit more information on that if you don't mind. And that's why I say you are your own best study. So if there's something, there is benefit to just we don't have all the answers in medicine. And the other thing about medicine is, unless you can design a really well-designed study, and it has to be longitudinal, and we've got to have a, like a control group. And so it just takes time to really say something is evidence-based and it's been well-researched and vetted and all of that. And in the meantime, there's a lot of anecdotal things out there. And as long as we're not causing harm, then I think that it can be helpful, and that's what we should be sharing with each other, right? I think there's benefit in that. Oh, okay. Thank you for joining. Come back next week. You're welcome. It's good to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll look into yam cream, and then maybe I can throw some stuff out there too. So my homework is going to be histamine foods, putting out maybe an infographic on that, and then I'll look at yam cream. I'm not familiar with it, so I'll have to spend some time on that one, Mika. Okay. Increase or decrease hormone levels. If you're low in estrogen, it brings it up. Okay. And it's purely a topical then, I'm assuming. That's interesting. I'll look into it. Yeah, if it's helping, use it. That's awesome. Because again, that's low risk. I can't imagine there's really any downside to that. And if there's all upside, then that's fantastic. And did they say it's specifically for, like, what hormone? Did they get into those details? Is it estrogen that it's increasing? Is it thyroid hormone? Did they get into those specifics at all, Mika? Do you know? Or do you remember? And then do you apply it once a day, twice a day? Sorry, I'm getting into some specifics with you, so I apologize. And it's so hard to communicate on this thing. So that's my goal. The other thing I've done is create this community outside of the Instagram lives, right? So where we can continue the conversation, and I'm going to have some sort of Zoom meetings in there where it's a little bit more, we can easily interact with each other. It's a little bit more real time. All three hormones. Okay. All right. That's awesome. I love it. Okay. It's topical, yes. So as needed. Okay. Interesting. So it's quickly effective then, I would imagine. I highly doubt that, but I totally get it. Oh, Rika, you are too much. Yeah. But that's pretty good if it's that effective where, like, in the moment you can put it on and see a benefit fairly quickly. That's pretty amazing. All right. Okay. I love it. I'm gonna look into that. That was all I had for today. Any questions? Anything else? I've got my homework assignments. Anything else? Okay. Well, if you're in Portland, hopefully you're in a place you can stay for a little while. We're getting dumped on with snow, which is very atypical for us. You're very, very welcome. Thank you. You too. Thank you for showing up. I tell you, this brings me joy to sort of do this and provide information that's hopefully helpful. Don't be shy. Message me if there's a topic in particular you want to talk about. If you haven't joined the Vitality Collective last week, I appreciate you. And I'll see you guys next week. Alrighty? Take care. Have a great week. Stay warm for those in Portland. Bye-bye. You're very, very welcome. Bye-bye.